Hey everyone, welcome to this segment of Black Spring with Autumn on this January 9th, 2020. And as always, I'm happy to have everyone here. Hope you're doing well. And I'd like to bring you a couple of stories today. First, I'd like to start out with the bottom of the barrel, and that would be the political aspect. I'll be bringing you two stories. One story would be with Speaker Pelosi and our favorite Hollywood elite from the MAGA hoax. So here we are. We have Speaker Pelosi here, and we also have our favorite golden delete of the MAGA hoax himself, MAGA hat hoax himself, Mr. Juicy Smollett. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and start with Speaker Pelosi herself. I'd like to start out with just her. Of course, by now you know that Speaker Pelosi has a press conference, and this was her press conference this week. And I'm bringing you just a few notes from Speaker Pelosi. Now, by now, I'm sure you know that Speaker Pelosi has this way of regaling everyone and being a full on entertainer, and she starts out with storytelling and everything at the beginning of her press conferences. So this time was no different. Instead, she starts out with she received a inquiry about, of course, she referred to them as the three I's. That would be the impeachment, Iran, Iraq, and she started out with those things. And she was also asked some questions about, of course, how the American public were advised and how they were informed about the strike that killed Qasem Soleimani. Well, she starts out by saying, of course, it was a provocative strike that endangered Americans. Imagine endangering Americans, which it actually did the opposite thing. If you're not familiar, if you're just tuning in, we all know that we ended up not losing any lives in that particular strike. And even with the retaliatory strikes, we didn't lose any lives after Iran decided to do their own strikes against the U.S. So there again, there's projection 101 of Speaker Pelosi in her press conference. She goes on to say, she talks about, it's important for us to protect and defend, under our oath, and we must do that so patriotically and so courageously. And this was the number one ticker. It's not about how bad they are, it's about how good we are. So I thought that was pretty pivotal from her, and she did that. She made that statement more than once. So to me, it's more of, here again, you're appeasing a terrorist. You are allowing bullies to, we should appease terrorists or pay them off like previous administrations, perhaps. Is that what you're suggesting? That looks like, sounds like it to me, based on what you're saying. And that's pretty provocative in itself, Speaker Pelosi. So I don't think Americans agree with you on that. America does not believe that we should stand down and allow people to kill American soldiers who are serving the country and that are protecting our freedoms, as well as the allies the allies. We don't believe that. And we also believe that under this president, that the president is doing his job, and we support him on that. So no, he did not endanger lives. He actually saved lives. In fact, if you remember President Trump stating that he was not trying to start World War III, he was simply trying to end a war before it even started. So, of course, Speaker Pelosi, she's regaling us with all her virtue signaling. Oh, we pray for peace, and we should be prayerful. And I've never seen her, so she's been so prayerful all this time. Never, so prayerful. And she goes on to talk about passing war power de-escalations in order to limit the president's power. And there's the point of discontent and egregiousness for the American people, the American soldiers, our interests, our assets, that she's implying that the president's powers need to be limited. And it also brings me on to the AUMF is something that came up during her press conference. And she talks about how, one of the reporters asked her specifically, do you think you need a broader AUMF, considering that this attack actually happened in Iraq? And so she goes on to regale everyone with saying that, oh, well, in the past, we had approved resolutions, and it was in an appropriations bill, the AUMF of 2002. But she says that Paul Ryan took the resolution out. So I was just thinking, well, that's pretty interesting that she's saying that Paul Ryan just took out this particular resolution. So I thought, well, hey, why not? It's as good a time as any, right? Why don't we just have a look and see what's in it? So if you will just take a look with me here, you will see on your screen, what you will see on your screen is a copy of Public Law 107-243. And here it talks about, of course, this was established by the 107th Congress, and it cites the 1990 and 1991. As you know, we have a long history in the Middle East and the tensions and the conflicts. So I just looked at a couple. I'm not professing to be a legalese expertise, but I would say that there are pertinent things that I see that would be relative. So here, as we have, whereas in public law here, near the bottom, on August 14th, 1998, that Congress concluded that Iraq's continuing mass weapons of mass destruction programs threatened vital United States interest in international peace and security, declared Iraq to be in material and unacceptable breach of its international obligations, and urged the President to take appropriate actions in accordance with the Constitution and relevant laws of the United States to bring Iraq into compliance with its international obligations. Okay? So there's just one piece. I'm just thinking it's interesting that she's saying that Speaker Ryan removed this particular document, which of course you can go a little bit further. If you keep going, you will find other segments here where you can go on here where you can see it says, whereas Iraq's demonstrated capability and willingness to use weapons of mass destruction, the risk that the current Iraqi regime will either employ those weapons to launch a surprise attack against the United States or its armed forces, or provide them to an international terrorist who would do so, and the extreme magnitude of the harm would result in the United States and its citizens from such an attack combined to justify action by the United States to defend itself. So I will tell you, just looking at all of this, it just looks like there's been all kinds of, the law specified so many things, and I don't believe that this document was obsolete. I don't, and I'm wondering if that would be, if that's what triggered, if what she says is true, that this document was protected because it's still relevant. It's still relevant to protecting the American people, and she's citing that it should be rewritten. So if we scroll here, you can do this for yourself, of course. Comb through it yourself. Now, Section 3 is the authorization for use of United States Armed Forces. A is the authorization. The President is authorized to use the armed forces of the United States as he determines to be necessary and appropriate in order to 1, defend the national security of the United States against the continuing threat posed by Iraq. 2, enforce all relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions regarding Iraq. And here, B, presidential determination in connection with the exercise of the authority granted in the subsection A to use force, the president shall, prior to such exercise or as soon as thereafter as may be feasible, but no later than 48 hours after exercising such authority, make available to the Speaker of the House of Representatives and Presidents pro tempore of the Senate his determination of that. So here it is. You have this. It's pretty extensive. You can go into that. But I do believe that a lot of the segments that are a part of this law, a lot of mentions in this law would be relevant to some of the things that we're seeing. And for one, I'm not convinced, and many people of course are not convinced that, Iran and the Iraqis, that they are done with their engagement. They're not actually quite done with their engagement. I mean, we may be at risk of cyber attacks. We may be at risk of many of these things. So I'd love to know what you think about. I'd love to know what your particular take is. I mean, what do you think the movement is going to be? Is she going to be successful at removing powers or limiting the president's powers as we go forward? If there's more conflict comes into play, that is the question at hand. Will she and Barbara Lee that she mentioned during the conference, will they be successful at whatever resolutions or determinations they're composing or rewriting? But of course, it has to pass the Senate. So here again, she might be DOA, and as in previous measures with all the other bills, 200 plus bills that are sitting on the desk or sitting in the Senate. So with that said, I would like to move on very quickly to our next segment. And that particular segment brings us to none other than Mr. Smollet. Now, if you're not familiar with Mr. Smollet was the Hollywood actor who basically staged a hoax, or some people might even want to say allegedly. He staged a hoax in which he implicated MAGA hat wearers in Chicago during sub-degree temperatures, attacked him after leaving a Subway restaurant, proceeded to tie a rope around his neck, pour bleach on him, beat him, and shouted MAGA country. So that's the Mr. Smollet that's in question here, his particular case. So what we can do is just look at that and see where we are. The fact that they've even, reopened and decided to reinvestigate this particular case is pretty telling. So here, if you will look with me, Jussie Smollett investigation. The judge orders Google to turn over a full year of the actor's data as part of a special prosecutor probe. Now, of course, I'll quote here. This is written by Megan Crepeau and Jeremy Gorner. This comes from the ChicagoTribune.com. Here again, this is the source just for this instance. I rarely ever quote them, but this is for this case. We'll go with that. Jussie Smollett, there's a lot of background, a lot of even previous administrations, and there was a lot of conflict of interest and people that were implicated in helping Jussie Smollett pull off this particular situation. Originally, the case was pretty much thrown out, and then it was reopened. So here we have that a Cook County judge has ordered Google to turn over Jussie Smollett's emails, photos, location data, and private messages for an entire year as part of the special prosecutor's investigation into the purported attack on the actor. 2 sweeping search warrants obtained by the Chicago Tribune provide first public glimpse at the direction of the probe by Special Prosecutor Dan Webb more than 4 months into the investigation. Now, the warrants filed last month in the circuit court sought a trove of documentation from Smollet and his manager's Google accounts, not just emails, but also drafted and deleted messages. Any files in their Google Drive, cloud storage services, any Google voice text, calls, and contract search and web browsing history, and location data. So here it is. This is just a slight, I guess, a bit of a recap. Investigators sought a full year's data from November 2018 to November 2019, even though the key events in the controversy took place in late January and late March 2019. The authorities could be looking for incriminating remarks from Smollet or his manager, especially in the months after the state's attorney, here we go with the implication and the corruption, Attorney Kim Foxx's office abruptly dismissed orderly conduct charges against the then, quote, Empire, end quote, actor just weeks after his indictment. Smollet, who is African American and openly gay, you got to put that out there. You got to put that special protections handle out there, has declared the dismissal a vindication of his claims that he was the victim of a racist and homophobic attack. So, there you have that particular story. Now, what you can do if you are interested in, of course, following more up on the story, you may have to do a little bit of digging around, because that particular story got pretty messy between Kim Foxx. I've even heard some implications that maybe even the Obamas may have even were trying to get him off of this particular charge and calling in favors, just the Chicago way. That's how it runs. But I'd like to thank everyone for joining me here again on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. And I hope to see you again on the next segment. And please let me know what you think, as always, in your comments, concerns. If you like it, if you don't like it, subscribe and share. That helps with algorithms, that helps with censorship. It helps with all the things all the challenges that conservative voices and American patriots are dealing with. So I'd like to see you next time on Black Spring with Autumn.